I want to start off by asking you a question, a little bit more interaction as we go here. But I want to ask you the question, why is your best friend your best friend? Why is your best friend your best friend? I keep asking that question to give you a chance to think here. But what makes them your best friend? Now, let's be fair. Let's be fair here. You don't have to refer to your spouse. You can if you want, but you don't have to. But I just ask you that question. Why is your best friend your best friend? I want to hear from you. Yeah, Kirsten.
Acceptance, no judgment, can be transparent.
Wow, she just comes out. 1, 2, 3. Are they in any order?
That's half a day.
That's awesome. She said acceptance, transparency, and no judgment. Not in that order, but that's pretty good. Yeah, Lauren.
I think shared circumstances. You know, they walking through things with you in proximity. It's hard to have a best friend who lives in California, you live in Indiana. You have to be close.
Yeah. We have some geographical friends as well, and I think most of the friendship is spent trying to figure out how to get together, rather than just being together. Yeah. Anybody else? Come on, you guys got best friends, right? Yes, in the corner. Dawn.
If they see me at my worst and they see me at my best, and they love me anyway.
Oh, I'm one of your best friends. Just kidding.
See me at my worst yet.
Oh, never mind then. Mark you off my best friend list. Yeah, they've seen you at your best and seen you at your worst, and yet they still hang out with you, choose to hang out with you. That's good. What else? Why is your best friend your best friend? What? Because you love them? Good. This is as deep as y'all are going to get today. I was at a memorial service last night, and I watched the best friend say goodbye to his best friend, and you could just see the brokenness of this young man, and just the hurt. They're only like 35 years old, and when you die out of order, it seems like it's even harder. But there's something about having that best friend that's like a huge deal, and that takes me into today's lesson. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 18 through 20 today. And we finished up with David being a shepherd boy, and he defeated the great giant Goliath last Sunday. And we talked about two of the main characters being, besides Goliath, being David and King Saul. And we talked about David's relationship with the Father and how he trusted the Father, yet King Saul lived most of his life and his reign in what? Do you remember? Say it out loud.
Fear.
Fear is that Saul lived in fear. And I think as we progress through this story today, you're going to see, I put on Facebook that last week's story was kind of like the epic movie. Would have been the 3-hour movie. I don't know how you make David and Goliath in a 3-hour movie, but they would have done it. But then today's story is more like this Shonda Rhimes TV drama series. It's just got so much drama in it and everything else that it's like week after week the story evolves. So we'll just kind of jump into it today, and I'll try to read some to you and tell some to you so we can get through this thing. But we're in 1 Samuel 18. It said, when David had finished speaking with Saul, this was immediately after he had just killed Goliath, and he comes in with Goliath's head under his arm, the big old melon under his arm, and he is in front of Saul, and he's speaking to Saul. It says, Jonathan committed himself to David and loved him as much as he loved himself. Now you go, who's Jonathan? Jonathan is Saul's son. David's a teenage boy, 18 years old. He's like killed this historical figure of Goliath that's like 9 foot 6 inches tall that nobody could even begin to touch. And Jonathan is enamored with David, the shepherd boy. And as he sits there and watches him interact with his father, the king, he says, I want to be friends with him. So much. I want to be friends with him because we are like-minded. No one said that in this room. Why is my best friend my best friend? Is because we are like-minded. We think alike. We like the same things. We do the same things. It's just natural for us to hang out together. And this is where Jonathan saw David. He said Saul kept David with him from that day. Remember, David had been with Saul before, but he didn't stay with him. He went back to being a shepherd. But now, this time, he's staying with him from that day on and did not let him return to his father's house. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as much as himself. Now, let me remind you, a couple of years ago, we spent a whole month or two talking about what a covenant was. Let me remind you what a covenant is. A covenant is really like 7 steps, but just for the brevity of it, we will talk about 3 of them. One of them is just making a statement, that there's an oral statement. I'm making this oath to you that this will happen, and this will happen in return. And so they've made this covenant with an oath, and then there is some kind of blood transaction. Like there's a literal blood transaction. For us, the oath in the old covenant, the oath was with God and the Israelites that they would sacrifice animals. But even when they made a covenant between people, there was some kind of blood that was poured out. Because, why is that? Because there is life in the blood. There's life in the blood. And then to really seal up this covenant that's made with each other, guess what you do last? Anybody know? It's one of my favorite things. You eat together. You celebrate this covenant together. So this is really what Jonathan and David did. They got together and said, hey, we're like-minded. Let's make this covenant together that we'll be friends. And it says in verse 4, then Jonathan removed the robe he was wearing, and he gave it to David, along with his military tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. Do you realize the transaction that happened here? After this covenant is made, honestly, Jonathan is the next in line to be the king after his dad. But he literally takes the physical robe and battle gear from his own belongings, and he says to David, here, it's yours. Like, I'm really okay with you being the next king. I'm committed to you that much that you can have my rightful place. And he does this in front of his dad. He was okay with passing on the monarchy to his friend David. Verse 5 says, David marched out with the army and was successful in everything Saul sent him to do. David was just one of those guys that was good at everything. No matter what he set out to do, he could do it. Saul put him in command of the soldiers, which pleased all the people and Saul's servants as well. He was the general. David became the general of the army. And as the troops were coming back, when David was returning from killing the Philistine, the women came. It says the women came out from all the cities of Israel to meet King Saul because, look, David was coming back into town. And we already know that David has been described as what? What? Handsome. He's been described twice as handsome, so now all the ladies are coming out to the street. Is it for King Saul or is it for David? And it says, singing and dancing with tambourines, with shouts of joy, and with three-stringed instruments. As they celebrated, the women sang, Saul has killed thousands, like they're praising their king. But then they quickly follow that verse up with, but David has tens of thousands. Wait. You see, kings in antiquity received credit for victories in battles, not the soldiers. It's the kings that were credited for killing people. Not even though the soldiers did all the killing. Now these women have said, look, King Saul's killed thousands, but David, the soldiers, killed tens of thousands. There's a little bit of envy going on here right now by King Saul. His son has already said, look, you can be the next king. The women in the town are saying, you're better than the king. And he's dealing with a bit of jealousy. It says Saul was furious and resented the song. They credited tens of thousands to David, he complained, but they only credited me with thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? So Paul watched David jealously from that day forward. There was a bit of bitterness there. Dr. Bob Cook often reminds us that everybody wears a sign that reads, please make me feel important. Right? You know, we like feeling important. And this is exactly where King Saul was at this point, is how can this shepherd boy be more important than me, the king of Israel? And then we get to this verse. Verse 10. This one I sat with all week long. The next day, an evil spirit sent from God took control of Saul, and he began to rave inside the palace. How does that feel? What just went through your head? What just went through your head when you read that? Anybody?
We don't think about evil spirits being from God.
Yeah.
I would say that.
And how can God?
It's against what we put.
How can God send an evil spirit? He totally goes against anything that I
Why
believe.
would he? You know
Yeah.
he can do anything
Yeah.
else, but
He can do it, but why would he? Because my God is a loving God. Should we just sit here on this for a second? Can the evil one be defined as one that's sent from God's presence? Like, literally, here's what happened. Let me read a couple more verses here. It says, David was playing the lyre as usual, but Saul was holding a spear and threw it thinking, I'll pin David to the wall, but David got away from him twice. It says, verse 12, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had left Saul. Now let me back up to verse 10. We already know that Saul was anointed by Samuel because of God. We know that Saul was put into place. But at some point during Saul's reign, he quit trusting God. And he began to do things out of his flesh, which, let me define, would be doing it out of his own strength. Like, I'm the king. I'm capable of being king without God. I don't need God. And at some point, it says in verse 12 that God left Saul. That it actually says the Lord was with David but had left Saul. So God sends this evil spirit to a man that has already walked away from God. So what does that look like? You know, the evil spirit, one, has already been banished from heaven. And the only way for evil to exist is in the absence of God. Like, I literally believe in this room. Hear me now. I literally believe in this room that if you believe Jesus is the Son of God, and that He died upon the cross and His blood was poured out, and He forgave you of all your sins, past, present, future, and that He now lives within you, that He's, look at this, He's taken your Adamic nature, your sinful nature that you were born with, and He's eradicated it from you, and He now has put His new spirit in you, that you are a new creation, 2 Corinthians 5:17. That you're a new creation in Christ. That's you sitting in this room right here. He's taken one spirit out. He's taken your old, cold heart out, cruel heart out, and put a new heart in and has made you a new person. It's not natural for me to do evil. It once was. It once was. Now, understand this, when I explain this, is the only way that that's possible is because Jesus died on the cross and I live after the cross. This story that we're reading here actually occurred before the cross and Jesus hadn't come yet. So this spirit that's like come inside of me and you and is hanging out with me and you, the same spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, and makes it natural for me to do good things. I don't have to force myself to do good things. It just naturally happens. This same spirit that lives in me didn't necessarily live in Saul. That spirit would come upon Saul, and occasionally the scripture does say that it entered into them. But in this case it says it's left. It's vacant. It's a big deal. I really have to reconcile this verse for myself. I don't know if I have to do it for you, but I have to do it for myself. And then I jumped to 1 Kings chapter 22, and it says this. I thought this was insightful. 1 Kings 22, it says, "Then a spirit came forward, stood before the Lord, and said, 'I will entice him.' The Lord asked him, 'How?' He said, 'I will go and become a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets.'" So this evil spirit comes before God and says, I'll go and I'll put deception in his mouth. This is a totally different story than what we're reading. I'm just trying to explain to you what's going on here in light of all 66 books. This spirit comes to God and says, I can go and I can put deception in his mouth, and he will be declared a false prophet at that point because he will be lying. If you're a real prophet, everything you say is going to be true. Then he said, you will certainly entice him and prevail. God says this to the evil spirit. Yeah, you'll do that. Not like, yeah, go do that. Yeah, you'll do that. And then he dismisses that evil spirit by saying, yeah, go and do that. He's already said, you're going to do that. Go and do it. And so I take what I read there in 2 Kings and I transfer it back to like this same statement as God sent an evil spirit. Well, that evil spirit was going to do it because that earthly body of King Saul had been vacated by God. It's kind of crazy to think about, isn't it? You think about throughout the old covenant, the Lord used the enemy to like bring judgment on people. Like literally, he caused the Philistines to bring judgment on the Israelites and the Jews because the Jews had kind of turned their back on God for a period of time. Yet, not only does he use the enemy to like pass judgment in the old covenant, but he also uses the enemy to prove that he's God. Think about this for a second. If he uses the enemy to prove that he's God by showing faithfulness to the believer, like right now we have a hero in David and we have an enemy in King Saul. And if God allows this evil spirit to work through Saul to prove David's faithfulness, God's going to be able to prove himself even more. And once Saul was identified as a false prophet, he was going to lose all credibility with the people. I have a hard time with that verse, as you can tell. But I can also see how God uses that to glorify the life of David. It says, I read again, David was playing the lyre as usual, which is like a harp. But Saul was holding a spear. This is like, how many times has David faced the spear in his life? We know of at least one other time. Last week he was faced it with Goliath. And he threw it, thinking, I'll pin David to the wall. But David got away from him not once, but twice. Like, okay, you're sitting there playing a harp, and the king, with all authority, has a spear, and he throws it at you while you're playing the harp. Yet you avoid it. What do? Huh? You leave, right? You leave. But what does David do? I guess he keeps playing the harp. He's like, look, king, I get that you're upset with me, but I'm going to sit here and I'm going to continue to do my duty. And it happens the second time. The king picks him up. It's either like David's really stupid or David trusts what he knows. David trusts what he... Well, what do you know about David? He's already been anointed as the next king after Saul, right? Samuel did this as a child to him. He knew he was going to be king. So it's like, he can't hurt me. I still haven't been king yet. I'm still going to be king. And it says, after the second time he threw it thinking, I'll pin David to the wall, but David got away from him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had left Saul. By that little interaction, it was clear whose side God was on. Because Saul can't be that bad with the spear. It says Saul was afraid of David. Again, we see the fear in Saul. Because the Lord was with David but had left Saul. Therefore, Saul reassigned David and made him commander over 1,000 men. He now became demoted from a general to a centurion. Basically saying, you're in charge of 1,000 men. You have to go out and lead those 1,000 men in the field of battle. I'm putting you out in the field now. You don't have to sit behind your desk and control everything, but I'm ready for you to die. So go to battle. Made him commander of 1,000 men. David led the troops and continued to be successful in all his activities because the Lord was with him. When Saul observed that David was very successful, he dreaded him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he was leading their troops. Can you see how this story just plays out? The love for David grew and the fear in Saul grew. Verse 17, Saul told David, here's my oldest daughter, Merab. I'll give her to you as a wife. If you will be a warrior for me and fight the Lord's battles. But Saul was thinking, my hand doesn't need to be against him. Let the hand of the Philistines be against him. I'm just going to let the Philistines do the battle for him. It comes out, as we read through this chapter, I'll try to blow through it real quick, is that David was already once promised Saul's daughter when he killed Goliath and he didn't get her. Now he's provided a second daughter if he goes out and serves as the centurion. And he does that. And he comes back and he says, look, I don't know if I'm really the person to take the king's daughter, because you realize if you take the king's daughter, what comes with it? All the riches and everything. He's like, I'm just a guy from poor old Bethlehem, a shepherd boy, and I've even got Moab blood in me. Remember Ruth from Moab? Like non-Jew? I've got non-Jewish blood in me. I really don't deserve to take this daughter, and it says that the king gave his daughter Merab to another man. And then you find out that the king has another daughter, Michal, who absolutely has fallen in love with David. Like, she is absolutely smitten about David. And eventually we find out that Saul does give Michal to David. And here's what he said. This is kind of, I'll go ahead and read this to you. Saul said, to get my daughter Michal, here's what the price is for Michal. I'm in verse 25. It says, the king desires no other bribe except 100 Philistine foreskins. That's just nasty. To take revenge on his enemies. So, in other words, David, if you want Michal, my daughter, who obviously wants you, you're going to have to go out and get 100 foreskins. And to get 100 foreskins, look, you're going to have to kill me to get my foreskin, is what these Philistines are saying. And the king knows that. And David goes out, and not only does he kill 100 Philistines, but he kills 200 Philistines. I would not want the next job after killing him. And he brings this death back to King Saul and says, look, I have much respect for you, enough that I have doubled what you have asked for. And it says, then Saul gave his daughter Michal to David as his wife. Saul realized that the Lord was with David, and his daughter Michal loved him, and he became even more afraid of David as a result. Saul was David's enemy from then on. The battle was on. Every time the Philistine commanders came out to fight, David was more successful than all of Saul's officers, so his name became well known. It was already well known. He beat Goliath, right? It was already well known. I'm going to see how much I can get through this next chapter before we have to wrap up here. Verse 1 of 19, it says, Saul ordained his son Jonathan and all of his servants to kill David. But Saul's son Jonathan liked David very much. In other words, when Jonathan heard his dad's words, there was this internal collision that occurred between the young man's love for David and really his desire to please his father. Like, I've made a covenant with David, but it's my dad. So he told him, my father Saul intends to kill you, David. Be on your guard in the morning and hide in a secret place and stay there. I'll go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are and talk to him about you. When I see what he says, I'll tell you. In other words, I am going to go on your behalf, and I'm going to speak on your behalf, and I'm going to try to get my father to not want to kill you anymore. And Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul. He said to him, the king should not sin against his servant David. He hasn't sinned against you. What has David done to you? In fact, his actions have been a great advantage to you. Everything David has done, it's been for you. He took his life in his hands when he struck down the Philistine, and the Lord brought a great victory for all of Israel. You saw it and rejoiced, so why would you sin against innocent blood by killing David for no reason? It says Saul listened to Jonathan's advice and swore an oath. He swore an oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed. This is Saul saying this about David. I'm not going to kill him. So Jonathan summoned David and told him all these words, and then Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he served him as he did before. Can you imagine the tension in the room? David comes back, okay, I'm coming back to do my job. He's already thrown a spear at me twice. He's put me out there against the Philistines. He's doing all these things. But I'm going to do my job because I trust the Lord. Verse 8 says, when the war broke out again, David went out and fought against the Philistines. What happened? He defeated them with such a great force that they fled from him. Now an evil spirit, here's that stinking evil spirit again. It just caused him to be crazy. That's what this evil spirit did. It really caused a temporary insanity. You realize that, right? Because it said back in the previous chapter, in verse 10, it says there was a rave inside the palace, all hell broke loose when this evil spirit would come into Saul. And so now this evil spirit sent from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his palace holding a spear. Here we go with the spear again. David's playing the lyre again. And Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear. Again, this is now the third time. And Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear. As the spear struck the wall, David eluded Saul, ran away, and escaped that night. Saul sent agents to David's house to watch for him and kill him in the morning. But his wife, Michal, is now warning him. Not only is these are King Saul's kids. Right? His daughter, Michal, and his son, Jonathan, are both saying, he's my dad, but he's kind of crazy and he's going to kill you, David. And they're trying to protect him. She says, if you don't escape tonight, you'll be dead tomorrow. So she lowered David from the window, and he fled and escaped. Then Michal took the household idol that tells you that the Lord has left Saul because there's an idol in the king's house. She took the household idol and put it on the bed, placed some goat hair on its head, and covered it with a garment. Now, what you have to see here is kind of interesting because Michal's actions create this really strong contrast with those of her husband, David. Whereas Michal trusted in a teraphim, an idol, to save David, David trusted in the Lord. So you can see a big contrast even between David and his own wife. In verse 14 it says, when Saul sent agents to seize David, Michal said, he's sick. Saul sent the agents back to see David and said, bring him on his bed. I don't care if he's sick, you bring the whole bed to me. Bring him on his bed so I can kill him. When the messengers again arrived, to their surprise, the household idol was on the bed with some goat hair on its head. Saul asked Michal, why did you deceive me like this? Saul asked Michal, why did you deceive me like this? You sent my enemy away, and he has escaped. He's just ballistic at this point. He's insane. She answered him, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? In other words, she's now lying to her dad, saying, he told me he was going to kill me. He told me he was going to kill me. She's doing everything that she can to cover, even if it means that she has to lie to her dad and pin it on David himself. Verse 18 says, so David fled and escaped and went to Samuel at Ramah. That's 3 miles away. And told him everything Saul had done. Remember, Samuel was the one that was actually the one that anointed both King Saul and King David. He was one of the last judge. Then he and Samuel left and stayed at Naioth, which is about 5 miles north of Jerusalem. And when it was reported to Saul that David was at Naioth in Ramah, he sent agents to seize David. This was it was almost like a seminary that was just north of Jerusalem, that they just went and they just focused on the teachings of the Lord. And it says, however, when they saw the group of prophets prophesying with Samuel leading them, the Spirit of God came on Saul's agents. So Saul sends his guys to like get David. And when they get there, they see Samuel and David worshiping and prophesying. That means telling the truth about God. And all of a sudden, they began speaking truth about God. Saul's men that he sent now all of a sudden have been converted. It says, when they reported to Saul, he sent other agents, and they also began doing the same thing. They started telling the truth about God. So Saul tried again and sent a third group of agents, and even they began prophesying. Get this, you can see this right here. There is now a battle between the Spirit of God and flesh. Saul is sending his men that he's taught about a different God in to do battle with the Spirit of God, and every time the Spirit of God is overtaking the flesh. And they begin to speak truth about God, and the Spirit wins all three times. Verse 22. Then Saul himself went to Ramah. He came to the large cistern at Seku, looked around and asked, all right, where are Samuel and David? I sent 3 groups here. You guys couldn't figure it out. I know they're this direction. Where are they? It says, we're at Naoth in Ramah, someone said. So he went to Naoth in Ramah. The Spirit of God also came on him. This is Saul, like the dude that the Spirit has left. And he's like walking to this holy place. And there's an actual Hebrew word that's used there in the scripture that's called ganhu, which really emphasizes the fact that Israel's most powerful citizen, the king, was now subjugated to the power of God. That he was overcome by the power of God. And as he walked along, guess what? He prophesied until he entered Naoth, and like even before he got there, he's speaking the truths of God. This is Saul. Saul then removed his clothes and also prophesied before Samuel. He collapsed and lay naked all that day and all that night. That is why they say, is Saul also among the prophets? Like, they understand that the prophets speak truth about God, and there's no way, we know that there's been an evil spirit in Saul, and he spoke lies. How can he be with the prophets? But here's the even bigger deal. He's naked. That's the bigger deal. It's the bigger deal because now he's lost his royal attire in the presence of God's Spirit. And it just presents this powerful image confirming the prophetic judgments that Samuel even had made earlier about Saul. God has rejected Saul as the king. So in God's presence, right there in the very presence of God, Saul would not be permitted to wear the clothing of royalty. It's a big deal. And it's even a more humbling deal for Saul because he remained naked there for days. And if you know the history there, in the Near East, laying naked brought shame to him. He lay there in this prophetic trance all day and all night. And just like the TV drama, I'm leaving you hanging. You see, I know my God is a loving God. And the difference between what I read right here and what I know right now is that He loves me He won't leave me alone. And all that stuff that we heard before we started this morning, I truly trust that He's with you. I truly trust that He's going to take care of your needs. I know you're dealing with junk. So you can either live in fear of that junk, or you can trust the Lord and know that He will fulfill His promise. Father, what a story that you continue to unveil through David. I pray that as we go throughout this week, that the trust that really comes from you would just be evident in the lives of these people right here, including myself, that we can just clearly trust you. I proclaim that for this group, that we can trust you. Your goodness, that you are a loving God, that you care for us, that you provide for us, that you have given us all that we have. Every spiritual blessing that we absolutely need, I pray that for this group right here. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.